to the Redcaps Podcast, a podcast where we dip our caps into the blood of our listeners and we ramble on about old school games. In today's episode, I am joined by the creator of Index Card RPG, Viking Death Squad, 5e Hardcore Mode, the Runehammer YouTube channel, and much, much more. As you know, no mortal can outrun a red cap, so I hope you can sit back, listen, and enjoy. So today's guest is none other than Hankerin Ferinale of Runehammer fame. We sit down and we chat about gaming, life, creativity, art, beer, a whole bunch more. I hope you guys enjoy this conversation as much as I did. So without any further preamble, let's get right into it. All right, folks, I am joined by a man with many names. Some call him Hankerin, some call him Brandish, some call him Runehammer, some have called him Drunkens and Dragons before. Hankerin Ferinale, how you doing today?
Hey, man, what's up? Good to be here on the Redcaps. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. Why so many monikers? Or which moniker do you prefer now, I guess, is the question.
Well, I think the people that know me best probably just call me B because it's so short. But I don't know if I have an explanation. I think when I was a kid, I really did not like my real name, which is a weird thing that a kid would think, right? I mean, it's like, what does it matter? But so I was always making up weird names for myself. It's kind of not really even a new thing. I've kind of always done that. So I would just walk around and make up some crazy name and just tell people I'm Abe Froman or whatever.
So where most people,
there's really a reason to it.
Most people seem to have when they're creating a character in an RPG game, a lot of people say the hardest part they have is coming up with a name, but that must be easy for you.
Oh yeah, that's always like I usually know it like a week before we're even going to play. I've been like, doing it over and over in my head, like chuckling to myself how clever I am.
If you were an RPG character, I think the DM of the game would have to like really question whether you cheated on rolling your stats. Because when I think about you and I go charisma, he's rolled max on it most of the time. The energy you bring, you're always like got a smile on your face. You're always laughing. Anytime I watch your stream intro and just the random songs and stuff you'll throw out to that, general positivity. How do you keep that much energy going? Like how is that your normal day-to-day persona, or is it something that you kind of try to amp up a little bit for folks? Or
I mean,
what is that?
It is the internet. So, I mean, on the one hand, yeah, I'm definitely a bit of a bubbly person. I do like I live very like day to day. I'm not like a future. I don't do well with the future. Let me put it that way. I definitely live like in each day, which definitely makes you a very somewhat bubbly. I mean, we all have like our downsides, I guess. But my thing with the internet has always been like, if you're not like really feeling it, then just don't do it. Rather than kind of like pushing yourself through it, like what pros must do. I'm not a pro. I'm just some guy. So if I'm feeling it and I'm feeling happy, then absolutely great time to be on the internet. Because I don't know, I also just don't like it if I get like negative vibes from the internet in any form. It seems so 90s to be negative on the internet. It's just that was over so long ago. So yeah, it's a little bit of both. I am a little bit like that, but it's also filtered a little bit for my sort of persona. Yeah,
it's good though, because you don't have to look very far to find negativity on the internet, but when you can find somebody who's bringing a lot of positivity to it and just seems to be having fun, I think everybody just gravitates to somebody who looks like they're having fun, right?
Yeah,
and so that's great. So yeah, so if you rolled super high in the charisma, then we'd look at like your wisdom, and for that I'm gonna go look at like the Index Card RPG, and the stuff you've got in there for DMs and stuff, the mechanics you've come up with. I think there's a bunch of good wisdom in there. Well, you've made a lot of people talk about Index Card RPG, but you've got a few different games, right? You've got that Viking Death Squad, 5e Hardcore Mode. Which one would you say is for what kind of player? Like, so who should be picking up what if they want to pick all three?
Death Squad is definitely like a sort of almost like a gag kind of a game, So it's so kind of over the top and for a lot of people unfamiliar, Surprisingly, Black Sabbath isn't as well known as I thought it was.
We've aged out, my friend. We've aged out.
So. Yeah, I think it could be that. Yeah, it could be that. But that one's kind of just like when you're in that kind of crazy mood, and it fits that really well, especially if you don't worry about what you're reading in there too much, and kind of just get the basics and get the tone and move on. ICRPG is kind of for the DIY person who, I'm a real like hardcore optimist. So I actually think like there are boatloads of like real do-it-yourselfer RPG people out there that aren't necessarily seen that much. They kind of just live in their own little world and they really don't advertise about it. And so that's what ICRPG was made for, is that person who like survives playing week to week, doesn't have really time to argue about RPGs because they're too busy like prepping the next session. That's kind of that person's game. And then the hardcore mode really is just how I just butchered 5e back into a game that was more familiar to me. I think 5e, especially as I'm well known for saying, like right when it came out was super exciting. You know, it felt like a really well cleaned up version of things. And I think maybe just because of small brain or the way that I focus and start butchering things like right from the beginning, as it started to expand and grow, I just kind of never stayed interested in it. And so all it became was maybe 4 or 5 rules innovations. That's all 5th edition really became for me and my players. But they were cool ones, you know, like Advantage.
Advantage is
a lot of people really like that. You know, it really simplified a lot of like deciding on penalties and stuff. And a lot of people really like that. But hardcore mode was kind of me just saying, you know, if you don't have the patience to absorb like how big 5e has gotten, and it's just not your jam, you know, like rock on with it. I really don't have anything against it. Then here's kind of how I cooked it back down to that more AD&D, more kind of old school kind of feel, I guess is what people call it nowadays. But for us, that was not really old school. That was just sort of our stuff. We just had little kludgy bits from all kinds of different games that we liked that would just go in, you know, and that's ongoing, you know, like we ditched attack rolls last year, and like that was huge for our group. So I think 5e hardcore mode is for that player. You know, it's for the brazen hacker who kind of likes to take little pieces of D&D here and there and just, it's a weird, you know, 5e hardcore mode is so strange. I think maybe just the title is why it sells really well, but it's really an odd little thing and is really not even that well thought out, honestly. It has a lot of like loose strings kind of hanging off the edges of weird bad cases that occur. How do you explain spells in simpler terms? And, you know, definitely asks GMs and players to do things, but I think it appeals to that player. Like it's a 5e player. They want some of the new stuff. They like the new stuff. You know, the art is more colorful and like more high production. So you're like, that stuff's cool. But man, like all these options and all these large hit point pools and stuff are kind of weirding me out. So I think it's for that person. So those are kind of three of my most high profile bits. And then, you know, I have a handful of all these little super weird kind of flopper RPGs that kind of live in little nooks and crannies.
Yeah, you've got something for almost every genre actually out there. Like all kinds of different things. It seems like something tickles your fancy and you are able to, you know, mad scientist it into being reality.
Yeah, I hope. I mean, only since like ICRPG really blazed the trail for me. That really got, you know, like I had enough readers. And then once those readers became patrons, I know Patreon gets like, you get sort of tired of hearing about it now and again. At least I do. I don't know. But once Patreon really took hold for me, that let me do that mad scientist stuff. I didn't really have to only do the thing I knew was kind of like the big thing. I could, you know, I would even just say like, what the hell should I do this month? You know, and they'd be like, I don't know, do a system agnostic weird setting that's just out of the blue, like a left field type thing. And I'd be like, okay. And then I would do that. And I do think that, at least I hope that's what people who like contribute to Patreon are looking for. I think that's the fun of Patreon. Definitely allowed for the mad scientist kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's a much more direct connection between the audience and the creator, right? It's like, hey, what do you want to see? This. All right, no problem. We go that direction rather than kind of.
Even if you ignore them, which I do all the time, I'll be like, you know, what should I do? And they'll be like, well, whatever you do, don't write a blog. And I'll be like, hey guys, new blog is out. You know, like but it's not necessarily about like that. It's more just they like to, at least from what I can perceive, a patron is someone who just likes to see you be daring, I guess. If you're overly safe, I don't think the patron is like satisfied, which goes, all the way back to like medieval times. That was the idea of patronage, is like you wanted to see what this guy would do if he wasn't worried about making gallery sales.
Yep.
And then it's like, whoa, what is this? Okay, well, actually, let's go back to the gallery sales because this is too weird.
All right, so if we jump from wisdom, we go to intelligence. You've got degrees in anthropology and philosophy, right? Where you went to school for those two.
Yeah.
I was speaking the other day with Dan Proctor of Labyrinth Lord fame. He's got his doctorate in anthropology, and he was talking about how he kind of gets the vibes of that from Moldvay, from Moldvay Basic as well, because Moldvay also had a degree in anthropology. That's suddenly hard to say. How do you feel that's impacted your writing or your games or anything like that?
Well, I think if you put those, I didn't quite have time to get all of them, but if you put a few college degrees together, you can definitely get like you can get like an excuse to study like the Hyborian age in college. There's like an imaginary, or maybe it's not imaginary, that remains to be seen. Like there's a sort of a dark period of human history. It's like Lemuria, right? Like it's this kind of unknown zone between like the sort of the Neolithic and the Dark Ages. It's very little is known about that whole time. Now it's probably not, straight up Hyboria, but it's kind of one of the closest things that we have to it in the real world. Like I guess like the Bronze Age is how you could think of it. And so really that's all I was doing. I was just wanting to learn about that because that's sort of always been my interest. And so I was like kludging these kind of like, like if you really did it right, you would get your world history, get your archaeology, maybe do creative writing. You would do these kludged together degrees where you could really just study this sort of Hyborian kind of concept. And that's kind of what was driving my interests, was that period and that kind of mindset. So yeah, for me, I know a lot of people joke about college not going into what you do, but for me, it was like Legos fitting together. Like one thing led directly to the other.
And I mentioned that you've written books, so it's not just RPG books. You've got novels out as well.
Yeah, it's very hard to sell a ton of novels, but in a way, I don't really mind that. I've never really set out to be a novelist, but it did like happen to me, sort of like this novel kind of happened to me. Like I didn't really even want to do it. I sort of got, a lot of things I do are based on like friends of mine sort of poking me in the ribs and like telling me to do something. And so I kind of got that challenge from a close friend. And I wrote the first couple chapters of Legacy of Mud, the one where, it's this big guy named Vald, and he's walking down a road and he fights some goblins with a sword, right? I mean, it's like the least creative thing you could possibly open a novel with. Because I saw it in my mind and I thought it would be neat, but it just kind of like ran away with it. It wanted to keep going, almost against my will. And I was also going through kind of a hard time in life at that point. And so like that kind of writing, RPG writing is very collaborative, and you got to have you're building on players, right? And you're building on things that work and things that don't. And you're checking it and you're asking and you're hearing. And since I was kind of going through a rough patch, I wasn't being that collaborative with anybody. I was kind of on my own a little bit. And novel writing, when you're on your own, is like you're in the zone. Like you kind of want to be by yourself, just living in your own little concentration space. So for, just over a year, it's kind of all I was doing just as my daily life, is I would kind of, about 1 or 2 p.m. every day, I would go to sort of my small town watering hole that had like all these windows. So you could see all the mountains and you could see everything. It wasn't like a dive bar or something, it was like a really bright open space. And I just went there and I'd order a beer and I would just like write for like 5 hours straight, like every day. And I did that for a really long period of time. And that was super fun. And I met my current wife that way, and like met a lot of great friends that way, and met a couple D&D groups that way. And so in a way it like really served its purpose. But writing novels, woof, my Lord, it is hard.
You were saying that it was kind of a time period where you could kind of you almost needed to have the little bit of alone time to get through whatever's in the head. I guess it kind of leans back to the whole like high energy persona type. Is everybody who's got ups and downs and stuff? Is that kind of how you deal with it? You kind of dive into your creative side and do like solo projects. Is that where?
Yeah, I mean, it may not be evident from how I am sort of on the internet, but I am kind of an introvert. I don't know. I'm very contrasty. I mean, there was once that I was like diagnosed with bipolar, which is like isn't everyone in like the 21st century. We're all a little bit bipolar. But I was like having trouble with it, I was struggling. Like my introvert side was too introverted and my extrovert side was like too manic, and so I was having trouble, like we all have rough patches like that. But I kind of am quite introverted. I live in a very monk-like way. So I have like, oddly enough, like a boatload of friends, and there's always something fun to do. But I really do enjoy like having a cold beer and a laptop and a notebook. Like that's kind of like just a space that I dwell in. Obviously, you can't just do that all the time. You go a little crazy. But yeah, that is something that I do a great deal of the time. Like, I mean, to be totally honest, when everyone else is at work, that's what I'm doing.
That's yeah. Well, everybody else is out doing their busy bee work. That's your work.
Yeah, well, and maybe they're in groups of people, working in teams with other people and working, at their location and stuff. I'm kind of just on my own. I don't have to go anywhere to do my work. So I kind of live in a bit of a monk-like kind of space with my introversion, but I definitely am extroverted when it comes to like time to not work.
Well, that leads us to Constitution. From everything I've seen, from everything I've seen, even including today, those people aren't going to be able to see the video, but there was a nice, healthy a mug of ale that was going on there. You've been able to. It looks like you'd be able to pass easily a contest after a nice night of carousing.
Oh yeah. And I've always been that way. I have no explanation. I mean, I don't want to encourage irresponsible beer drinking to anybody who's not ready for it. But for me, like when I was like 10 years old, my dad was a nom vet, and all his friends were like cops and stuff and nom vets. And there's this barbecue, and they're all drinking Coors Banquet. And I was like curious about it. I'm like in 4th grade or something. And they had this idea that they would deter me from liking beer by like forcing me to drink an entire can of Coors. And I think my dad knew right away that I was born a little different, because I was just kind of like, this is amazing. It's like soda that tastes like bread.
Your dad's going, we've made a terrible mistake.
Oh, yeah. This is not going to go well.
How have you found the switch?
It's just the thing. Con is absolutely my highest stat.
How have you found the switch from West Coast to East Coast in terms of bar scenes and everything else? Because you described a beautiful bar near a mountain. I assume that was on the West Coast, and now you're out.
Yeah.
It's Philly, right? That you're near.
Yeah, Philly. So, well, I guess there's 2 pieces there. That's a fun question. Thank you. There's 2 pieces. One is the people. The people in Philly, and I think the East Coast in general, are just extremely boisterous. There's a lot more reserved behavior on the West Coast. So one isn't better than the other, but it's definitely a thing. There's a lot of boisterous craziness in the East. So that's the big difference. As far as the beer, I think the beer is a little better on the West Coast. I think there is more newness on the West Coast. But I don't know, what's the old saying, like with toil a sweet thing is made sweeter. So in a way, in the East, when you find the great beer, which is definitely out here, it's a little more rewarding, if that makes any sense, because it's definitely here. It's just not quite as ubiquitous in the West. The West really, the Northwest especially, is very hard to beat on like the nano beer kind of scene, like where you you really are drinking day-old beer, like it's like a very dwarven level of beer connoisseurdom. And
Yeah.
like so many people around me have told me, you've got to write a beer blog, dude. You've got to do it. And I was just like, I don't know. That sounds like that could be a bad excuse to just drink more beer.
There could be excellent sponsorship opportunities there, sir.
It's for the blog.
So the furthest I've gotten west, I've only been I haven't been to the west coast of the US. I've been to like Alberta, Canada, is as far as I've gotten, which I'm barely on the edge of the Rocky Mountains there.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've been all over the east coast of Canada and the US. I've spent I don't know, maybe a weekend or two in Philly. I had a pretty good time there. It was a fun city. We were down to see a Penguins and Flyers game, actually. It was great. But yeah, I've enjoyed Philly. I've got to get over to the far coast of America and just kind of go through California and Northwest.
Oh,
and all
absolutely.
That.
The West Coast is beautiful and super cool people over there.
So leaving Constitution, we got to go to Dexterity, and I'm going to include in Dexterity fingers and tool proficiency with the drawing tablet. And I got to be honest, people like you are like wizards that I'm so envious and kind of dislike a little bit whenever I see how easy you make it look. I'm sure it's not easy. You've got years and years of practice, but when I watch it, it looks so easy that I'm just like, come on, man. At your guys' skill levels to take these, dark lines, and all of a sudden a very recognizable image just appears. And
right.
Can you tell me a little bit about your art style?
The right brain stuff is really all or nothing like that, isn't it? It's like there are definitely folks, lots of them, who just like their right brain is just not doing what some other people's right brain is doing. Like, and even for me, like, I see artists who do like rendering basically, which is something I really just don't do. And I'm just in the same boat as you. It kind of pisses me off. I'm just like, what? No, why does that look all correct? Why does that look proper? It's ridiculous.
But how would you describe when I watch your streams and you're whiteboarding something out, even if it's just text, which again, even your ability to write in that style is disgusting, I gotta be honest. But then when you look at like Index Card RPG and you look through the book and the arts that in there, how would you describe that style? Because it is very kind of distinct to yourself in that way.
Yeah, I mean, dry erase is a perfect way to describe it, because dry erase is very all or nothing. You don't really get a practice run with a dry erase. It's same with Sharpies, and those are the two tools that I've used the most over the years. Like, as is well known, I worked in the video game industry for many, many years. And the core skill that I had, sounds silly, but the core skill I had in the video game industry was dry erase drawing. Because in collaborative creativity, like, drawing and hearing people's ideas and sort of catching it, even if it's sloppy and kind of funny, if you can do that, it really is worth a lot, like in monetary value, to the companies trying to capture and create these ideas, And so that's something that was a core skill of mine. I would love to be in a room with a dozen super switched on people who are arguing, like what a thing should be like, right? Which is a very RPG
you mean
kind
this?
of mindset. Yeah. And I would like divide the board into 4 pieces right away and start like recording the camps and drawing arrows and making fun of people with little notes and like doing a caricature of somebody who made a stink face to call them out. And, but then somebody be like, well, it could be like this. And I was just very well known for just not hesitating. And, if we were arguing about like how a UI was going to be built, I would just start drawing menus. If we're arguing about, what the Jeep is going to be modeled like, just start drawing Jeeps. Just, can you draw 20 Jeeps in under 5 minutes? And give people sort of a chunky choice where they go, ooh, yeah, kind of like that one. And that's just what I did like every single day for years.
So yeah, and in the video game space, I mean, you're now immortalized because you're in WoW.
Oh yeah, I know, it's awesome.
But do you play games much at all? Like, do you have the time, or is that a hobby of yours that you continue yourself?
if I can't get out and like, get out and go somewhere and go do something, and like I'm tired of the book I'm reading, yeah, video games are great. I tend to have like oddball taste in video games, but yeah, I mean, I got an Xbox like any normal person, and I'm always seeking like the next one that's going to be great. Like the last one I finished was Proteus. I just finished that game. I think that's like game of the year for 2022. I absolutely loved it. But yeah, I don't know. I really loved Carrion. That was like 2 years ago. I thought that was one of the coolest little video games ever. But yeah, I kind of never fell out of that. I've been playing Pokemon Pinball for like 15 years straight. Like trying to beat like 7 years ago, I got like 600 million on Pokemon Pinball. And I've been trying to beat that score ever since. So.
I seem to have. I grew up in like a weird age where I missed Pokemon completely. Like it just wasn't part of my social group. So like I've never really understood the references and everything to it because it wasn't something I didn't watch the show. I didn't play the games. But now I've got a kid who's of that age group where Pokemon is everything, and I've become so versed in everything to do with that now. And the amount of time I've spent playing Pokemon on the Nintendo Switch is ridiculous, or on our phone. Like, can't go anywhere without playing Pokemon Go or something.
You were just a Pokemon late bloomer, that's all.
Yeah, apparently. I wouldn't say I'm a huge fan still, but I know a lot more about it.
Just the whole time, just grinding your teeth.
He finds it fun, so I will indulge.
Freaking Pokemon again.
Yeah, it never ends. Are we? Oh, I guess staying with the art for a moment. Are we going to see one of my favorite things that you do quite regularly is to flip through your notebook? Are we going to get one of those this year?
Oh yeah, I'm like. Well, I'm almost to that point of just drawing smiley faces on the pages because I think I have like a dozen pages left. When you're near the end of a notebook, you kind of almost learn to hate the damn thing. Like you really want to move on to a fresh one.
Last I saw you were using one of the. Sorry, last I saw you were using one of like the custom D&D, or not D&D, but is it by the Swordfish Island?
Swordfish. Yeah.
That's the current one that you're working on?
Yeah, and almost done with it. And it was cool. It has like some sort of different grid styles throughout it and different page styles to kind of prompt you a little bit, which really, and not to be mean or anything, just became kind of a nuisance. It's that kind of working sort of blue collar GM mindset. It's just like, I just need to get my notes down for the next session because I waited till the last second, and like, I don't need like an isometric grid, bro. It was like so many others. It lasted well. It got chewed on by the dog. I'm happy to be rid of it. Every time before I do those videos, I do have to go very carefully through the whole journal though, and like scratch out like people's phone numbers and emails and like weird little, like pessimistic notes to myself or like grumpy looking things. I don't want to like accidentally have somebody like freeze frame one of those videos because it is super like pants down mode to show those on the internet.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's like opening your diary.
Oh yeah, totally. And it's just, I think that is the value in doing it though too. I mean, I think it truly demythifies what the hobby is if you're really just doing it all the time. It takes away a lot of these myths of like, oh, well, I don't do that much prep, or oh, I do so much prep, or I don't know. There's just a lot of funny myths in the hobby about what may or may not be going on under the hood. But I don't use a screen, and we obey every single dice roll that we make. So if you know those two things about me and look at my journal and put that together, it is kind of like, oh my God, this is crazy. You guys are living on a shoestring over here.
Yeah, I've been the person that's kind of freeze framed some of your things going through it just to ogle at trying to figure out what your headspace was for any particular session that you're kind of getting ready for. I love looking at that. I've said to many people before, I've tried going through notebooks, and every time I get a new notebook, sometimes there's this anxiety that comes with this new notebook of like, I'm going to screw this up before I ever touch it. So like, I find I actually end up using like index cards more often, but the downside to the index cards, while I love them, is that they get disorganized or misplaced or whatever.
They never survive.
But
we always wind up tearing ours up to make fire.
Yeah.
Like you tear it in half and then you fold it like an accordion and you set it vertical on the table, and that's fire in our world.
Okay.
But yeah, index cards, ooh, man, they do not last. They're like newspaper. They wind up just like on the bottom of a bird cage. They just go away. But the number one way to beat that anxiety is when you get a new journal to open it up and like write your name and draw a smiley face on the first page. Just right away.
Are you a person
on the second page? Just do something stupid, or like put a big X and like a frown. Something to just like, because you're gonna ruin the damn book. That's why you bought it.
Yeah. Are you a person that is super particular about like paper and pens and all that? Or are you just like, it's somewhere for me to dump my brain and I don't care?
Paper, no. Pen, yes. So as you can see from the way that I draw and that I write, I go over almost everything twice. So even letters, like I'll write a note and then I'll say hi to somebody and be like, oh, it's going okay. Yeah. See you Thursday night or whatever. And I'll look back at my journal and be completely brain scrambled. So I'll trace over the letters again to get my head back in the space. Or like if I'm drawing a little dungeon, I always draw the lines twice because I like them to look kind of heavy. And many pens just fail at this. They just do not deliver enough like quantity of ink. So over the years, I have found like the thing that's closest to a Sharpie that's not quite a Sharpie. like ballpoint pens, I cannot endure them. I can't deal with pencils. Pencils drive me insane. I need like a ton of ink, but Sharpies are a little too strong because they'll eat your journal up.
Yeah, my father makes pens. He does like the wood turning and stuff and makes pens. So I've started to get into different styles of pens. I've always just been a ballpoint or a gel pen type person, but
gel, man, that's what I'm talking about.
But yeah, it's been kind of cool to try out different ones of those. It's interesting that you say that you trace back over it, because a lot of people like there's that whole field of study around like when you write something, it's locking it in your brain. And I find that interesting where you're like, you wrote something once, but then you got distracted, but retracing over it rather than just rereading it is what brings it back to your mind. Like that's very
absolutely
interesting.
Yeah. In college, I really never took notes, but I would like draw things, and the things had associations. And if I drew those same things, like while I was taking a test or something, I could draw a little thing in the margins and stuff, and it was like a mnemonic sort of trick that would sort of kick my brain in some bizarre way that I'll never understand. But it's just a way that I think, and I guess got lucky enough to see it and recognize it and run with it. So sometimes you'll see me draw like a circle with a triangle in it, or like a little shoe or something. I do that a lot. And it's actually like a note, which is it's so bizarre to try to explain. But later, like even weeks later, I'll see that specific little like combat boot that I drew, and the little note will sort of pop into my brain. Now that I'm saying it out loud, it's extremely weird.
No, I mean it's not that
like
different than people that say they have mind maps, right? Like when people say that they have that memory palace or whatever, where they picture a room and there's stuff on the wall and that's how they memorize stuff. It's kind of that same thing, right? It's the same thing you're doing it with a drawing.
I got to use that term more often. Memory palace. That's amazing.
I've never been up until I was in like my mid-20s. I always couldn't understand when people said they could visualize stuff. Like if somebody said apple, in my head, I was like, yeah, okay, it's a round fruit, it's red, it has a little stem, there's a green leaf. Like I was thinking it all in words, right? It was like I'm listing it, the list of properties, but I didn't picture an apple in my brain. When people said that they could see stuff like that, I was like, are you high? Like what? Like, how is that working for you?
It's like floating right in front of you.
But then I don't know. It's weird because I was like an avid reader as a kid too, but it was never an issue for me. But when I got into like my mid-20s, I started to be able to like was like one day I was like, oh, all right, I understand what you're saying now. I can kind of see stuff. I don't know what it was. Maybe I fell and hit my head. I don't know, but it was an interesting change there. But
it was like a Phineas Gage moment. I had like a pole go through your eye socket, and ever since that day, you could imagine apples.
Moving on from dexterity to strength. I've seen some of your Ampufit videos. Those are awesome. Cool. You are jacked, sir. you make flubby, both flubby and scrawny at the same time, like big belly with the tiny arms. Me going, damn it. But those videos are kind of a different kind of cool inspirational side. So like on the RPG space, a lot of your fans are seeing you for the creativity and the positivity stuff from there. But on the Ampufit side, that's a whole different community that you're kind of engaging there and showing.
I mean, that's a smaller group of people. I'm kind of more private about that. But yeah, I mean, after what happened to me, I kind of got, there's a lot of negativity in like medicine in at least in America. I don't know about elsewhere, but they have a very like poopy kind of attitude about like what's ahead, So when I got my leg amputated and everything, there's like a lot of like downer people like telling me how screwed I was. It was a real bummer, honestly. And so I kind of didn't like that I wasn't digging that. And so I kind of sort of found some better voices to be around me, and really finally got someone to be pretty honest with me. And they're like, look, if the statistics are that you are kind of screwed, like you steadily like lose function, and like your hips get all fucked up, and then your back gets fucked up. It's like this kind of doom and gloom. And they basically said, like, you kind of like have this like mandatory gym thing now, is a way to think of it. And if you don't do it, you're screwed. But it's relatively easy to prevent being screwed, because all you have to do is, like basically exercise. And I think this is like a thing that like is not common to be told in Western medicine. It's almost hard for the doctor to tell you that truth. So for me, I really took that to heart. So, geez, that was 15 years ago, and really have never really had a break except COVID from the gym in that time. And partly, partially because it's great, it's good for you and everything, but partially also it's really true what that person told me. Like if I do skip it, like I start becoming more disabled, so it's a little bit of a cheat motivation. I'm in a bit of an extreme situation. So if I do stop or I get lazy, it's like not cool. It's like, it is not good. So I kind of have to constantly push it a little bit. And then I do great. Then I go hiking and do all the things. And I even managed to build like a waterproof leg recently. Just basically improvising it. I didn't get a lot of help from the sort of the community, the like medical community. So just kind of had to use like a scuba leg thing and some boat epoxy, and like, those cool rubber straps that hold like a dagger on your leg when you're like James Bond. Yeah. Those rubber straps are really cool. So I got some of those to like keep the water out of it and everything. And like, yeah, so now I have like a fully functional like water leg, which is badass. So we went cliff diving on our honeymoon this summer and everything, and that was a blast. But it's all part of like not wanting to not be able to do that stuff, rather than wanting to feel great, which in some ways, this is kind of sad, but is less motivating.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think everybody kind of has that moment where somebody says you can't do something, you're like, oh yeah, watch this, and it's just a matter of
exactly.
It's who can keep the consistency of it up. I think is the bigger thing. Who can take it when it's not, when nobody's talking to you about it anymore, and now you just have that voice in your own head about whether or not you can do it yourself.
Yeah, very wise word. The gym is super boring. Like, let's not make any illusions about it. It is so boring and so annoying and takes up so much time. But yeah, it is like just a constant part of my life.
Yeah, my squat rack right now in the garage has a lot of other things hanging on it other than weights right now. Let's just say that. So
that's amazing.
But
various Pokemon.
Yeah, no, it's got not Pokemon, but I'm surprised it doesn't. That's everywhere else in this house. But so did all these stats? Is this kind of how your character was rolled at the beginning, or is this a series of leveling up? So were you like this as a kid as well, or the way that we've described all this, or were you a completely different? Like, would kid you recognize current you?
No, kid me would definitely not recognize current me. Kid me, like, so I had a major. I'm a late bloomer too, so I can relate to a Pokemon late bloomer. But like when I was about 23 or so, I totally changed. Like I was like super scrawny, and also I don't know how to admit it properly, but kind of like what's the word? Kind of like obsequious as a kid. I was like a mean nerd. I was kind of like really thought I knew everything. I was kind of mean to people about it, honestly. I was like,
so you were
really
Twitter before
like
Twitter.
I'd wind up like being like a professor at Princeton or something. I was pretty much convinced of that, and didn't have the humility at a young age to really understand like how collaborative the world is. And I don't know, it's almost hard to describe really. But then for whatever reason, I don't know why, maybe because I really shifted gears after college, and finally became like a physical person. Like I never did anything physical all until after college, and then finally got into like this sounds silly now because it's 2022, but like I got like a BMX bike, and like we used to play like roller hockey all the time. I got my first tooth knocked out playing roller hockey, like got checked into a fence. And instead of it being bad, it was just like, oh my God, this feels so awesome. Like, I don't know. And just that had never been part of my life in any way, and really, really changed my whole outlook. Really, it was really weird. It was just kind of that whole kind of mean nerd thing I was doing. Just maybe because it was a sign of the times, or what, it just went away. I was so rid of it. And it took a long time to come back to some of the things I love, like D&D. I was definitely like not into all this stuff for a while I was being much more physical. And basically being a better friend to people. And then it all kind of finally came back. But by then I'm like old and hopefully a nicer person. But yeah, kid me was, I don't know, it was real kind of like a loner with like perfect grades who looked down on people who didn't have perfect grades. Isn't that terrible?
Yeah, I said a minute ago. I was like, yeah, it sounds like you were Twitter before Twitter. But no, I can relate. I mean, I went through a phase similar to that as well, where I think because I was kind of a nerdy kid growing up too, where it was like, I think you just got you get bitter about being picked on about being nerdy, and then once you feel like you've got an upper hand on something, you're gonna play that card as hard as you can. But yeah, it's you gotta snap out of that at some point, or you just end up completely isolated, and you're not nobody wants to be around that. So
amen to that. Amen. Well spoken. So
you've got an index card RPG. One of the things I really like about it is that you use all the dice. Like every dice has a purpose. Like it's not where, I'm going to play this class today, so I can put half my dice set away. It's never going to be touched again. What's your favorite dice? What of the die is the favorite die? What if you can only have one? What are you picking?
Probably the most like limbic kind of lower brain, lizard brain level response is got to be a D12, I guess. D12 is king, because D20 you get numb to over the years. Like you just D20s, you're like, it's like your mother-in-law living in the backyard. But the D12, something's very exciting about that, especially just the way that I've always used it over the years. It's always been our like booster kind of die. It's like the biggest one that isn't a D20. So there's something like, I don't know. It's like you do a sword, but you jump out of a tree with your sword. So throw a D12 on top of the damage. I think that was something that my first real game master, Dave, used to do. Like the D12 was his kind of, blammo kind of dice. So when something was cool, you would always be eyeing that sucker. It'd be sitting there and you'd be thinking, when am I going to roll you? Soon, my friend.
I like the feel of the D12. I use, rather than using D6s, I used double D6s, so it's a D12 but
Oh
it has
yeah,
numbers
those are
1 through
so
6 on a
cool.
twice.
Yeah,
So I use those all the time. It just rolls better. It feels nicer in the hand. I do the same thing with the
those are
D4. I have
neat.
a D8 that's 1 to 4 twice. And it rolls nicer. Plus, there's no risk of stepping on that triangle of death.
Oh, you got to do the prism D4s, man. The triangle things are over. That's the past. The prism ones are the best.
I've seen those. I haven't actually rolled one of those. I've got to get my hands on one of those. I don't know. I look at it. I'm like, how is that going to go through like a dice roller, or how does it feel in the hand? I don't know. It just seems weird. I look at it, I'm judging it before I've ever touched it. But
You just put it in the dice roller and nothing comes out. So it's like,
yeah, I think it's stuck in there, wedged in there sideways.
guys, I got to go home now.
With all the products you've done, you've opened up a new web store. How has that
I know.
been?
I finally did it. I
So
overcame the tedium and procrastination.
So how's that process been, and why your own web store as opposed to like, the bog standard thing that everybody does with Drive-Thru-RPG or Itch or whatever else?
Well, I mean, the cool thing about Drive-Thru-RPG is the community and the flow, right? So if you're a fan and you're just, on your lunch break clicking through some stuff or whatever, it's really cool for that and just looking around. So much love to Drive-Thru-RPG. Chris Tang is my man. He doesn't work there anymore, but he took such great care of me through that experience. I love those guys. But they do take a nice big chunk of your sales in exchange for that cool community, which they should. They have a massive infrastructure. And their POD, like they just improved like half their POD machinery, which that must have been a massive investment on their side. So I absolutely love those guys. But if you do have enough momentum on your own, you absolutely want to be, especially selling like PDFs. You really do want to do it yourself. It's like, and I guess for me, the breaking point was, this is extremely detailed, this is kind of TMI, but like in the West, there's no state income tax, and the East, many states have it. And I didn't really know that. And then I just got like a piece of mail one day where I owed like Pennsylvania like 10 grand or something, which for some people maybe isn't a big deal, but I was kind of like, oh shit.
I don't know many people that's not a big deal of some sort where you suddenly get a 10K bill.
We're hanging out with probably the same people then. So yeah, I was like, crap, I need to like up my game. I got to overcome this. And I'm looking at, my, what limited data I do have. And that definitely came up as an area that I was kind of just bleeding off oxygen into space, so to speak. So I've known this for years. It's just the tedium of doing it and the internet savviness is just, it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be, but it is very detail oriented. I can say that, thank goodness for Kelsey at Arcane Library too, because she basically gave me like this 4 things that you should do and no other things like list. She just came right at me, just full on guerrilla mode, and just said, do these 4 things and just bag everything else you're doing. And I was just like, that is aggressive. So I kind of she's a great friend. So I just took her advice. I just did the 4 things. And one of those 4 things was like, you have to run your own in-house, like little commerce thing. And man, was she right too. I really think people greatly value that feeling of being in your little spot. That they're not going to someone else's stand to buy your fruit, so to speak, right? They're right in your little store. And that's worth a lot, I think, to people. So ever since I made that switch, that has been just going. That it's doing really, really good. And it's impossible to sell merchandise to RPG people. Like they just want books. They really don't want a hoodie or a t-shirt or whatever. But I was completely wrong about that. It's just how I was trying to do it was wrong. So even goofy things like stickers and t-shirts and stuff are just rattling off every day. So that was huge. And it's kind of a boring topic, but for those out there in my situation, it is absolutely worth doing, especially with attention to detail and, try to make it as smooth and and clean as possible, as simple as possible.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that with how easy it is, or easy in air quotes, it is right now to create supplements or games or adventures, in terms of the ease being that the tools are available if you have the creativity and ability to do so. That there's a lot of stuff going on to places like Drive Through RPG or HIO. And I think once somebody has enough material, like you've got several different games and different things that you're selling, it probably does make sense to go that route. But you've also kind of done stuff with other creators as well. So I noticed that Easy D6 bears your logo on it, from DM Scotty. Is that going to be a thing that you start doing more often, where you get other creators to kind of sell under your brand and store?
I'll tell you, it's 10 times as hard. It is, the level of difficulty is just so much higher to work with someone as brilliant as Scotty. It's so challenging. It's like the old adage that if you what is it? 2 dogs is 10 times as many as one. Right. So the minute you get a second dog, you feel like you have a pack of dogs running around your house. It's exactly the same when it comes to creativity. If you put one more person in the mix, it really gets tough, especially if you're a real stickler for like tone and theme and writing quality and sort of like editing, manic depressive flow, like I love it, I hate it, cut it, rewrite it. That's so much harder with another person. But on the other hand, it's really, really rewarding and really cool. I would love to do it with more people, but not to be blunt, but very few people are at DM Scotty's level.
Yeah.
He is like, he's a paragon, and so few people can really boast being that. And even then, even with all his like impeccable billion table hours, his specialty is not writing. So he just gives me all this like treasure, and I kind of need to tidy it up, because it's very stream of consciousness in a way. He's not really used to trying to get that tasty sentence. So that is a ton of work, but damn, it's really, really great getting his book out. There's something really cool. It's like easier to promote someone else's stuff. It's like, if I make a thing, it's really awkward to be like, yo, dude, my book is so cool. What kind of weird behavior? But if it's Scotty's book, it's so fun to be like, oh my God, you have to get it, because the way that he sort of does question and answer with you to teach you things is so cool, and it's so Scotty. You got to go check it out. And so that part I really like. I would love to find the next person to do that with, but I got a bit of a journey to go with Scotty yet.
Yeah, I can't. I'm having a brain fog on who it was that was in the video for Scotty's thing, where they're like, "This is the best." Who was it that did that video?
Yeah.
This is the best RPG ever created.
That's DMG info. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm watching through this video as he's describing it. I'm like, that is like, he better have been bought a beer or something at the end of that, because that was the best like little sales pitch. I was like, somebody's that impressed with the system. I gotta go take a look at it, so I'm going to copy that up. And
he is almost has as much cred and background as Scotty. That's Gareth. He's also known as the DMG. But he also is one of the absolute originators of like YouTubing D&D and crafting and just being public about it. He's an absolute legend. He did hit a major speed bump though in his journey, which like his YouTube account got hacked at one point, and his whole thing just got this whole body of work, like 8 years of work, just got wiped. And it's such a bummer, but he's kind of like the Australian DM Scotty. Like he's a great dude. He's super fun to game with. But yeah, I think a lot of people don't know him as well as Scotty because of that terrible hack that happened to him. So he's kind of pops up here and there. He's kind of ever present.
How after all this time that you've been on that platform, how do you find YouTube? Is YouTube still a fun spot? Is it a necessary evil? Do you look at things like TikTok or the other platforms to look at, or are you just like, no, I've got my thing and this is where I'm at? Like, what is YouTube to you?
I'm a little bit like anybody where I'll like, I like my funny videos. That's just kind of, it's almost like modern TV, really, of like,
Hmm.
I like crafting videos. I like, I got a dog and a cat, so I'm just like everyone where I like dog and cat videos. I like anything that has like Viking stuff going on, So yeah, I look at all those platforms, but I do think that they age quicker than YouTube. Um, YouTube has a weird thing where it doesn't seem to age. Like the people using it definitely age, and like the trends change. Like I don't know if anybody's like watching Markiplier anymore or anything like that. It's kind of from the early YouTube days. Um, but YouTube itself like doesn't change, which I guess is sort of the power of Google. Like if you look at something like Instagram, like it really has changed, and in not good ways. I think a lot of people agree. I would argue the same with TikTok. It's like it forces things on you in a way that feels like change and like makes you feel kind of queasy or something. But YouTube doesn't do that. It just sits there like a library. It's just like this massive, quiet beast. And I do like that about it. As far as for producing for it, I'm not as excited as I was. It's extremely time consuming to compete with the, really well produced videos. And I really do, I get more reward out of like making RPGs and playing rather than editing like footage of myself, what can get extremely strange sometimes. Um, but YouTube as a platform, I think it is the bomb. I mean, if you're like trying to fix something in your house or like change the exhaust on your car, I mean, what is the first thing you do? You go
Yeah,
to
well,
what is now the library. It's like YouTube, and
yeah,
there's always some dude showing you how to fix your car or whatever. So I really do think YouTube has longevity that I really like.
yeah. Well, I mean, I can't remember if it's surpassed Google or if it's number two. It's either number one or number two. It's the most commonly used search engine. Like people go to YouTube to search for things before they even search on Google.
Oh, before they even go to Google, right, because they
Because
just
they're
want to
like,
get the
yeah,
speed
just
version.
show me, like visually, let me see what it is I got to do for this thing. And yeah, I
Wow, that's
mean,
wild, man. That's also
so,
kind of risky. What if you're looking up crazy stuff?
but like I think you're right though, in that it's like a giant library that everybody knows is there, and it's got that comfort level. Like even the interface of YouTube hasn't changed that dramatically, or
Yeah,
it
it's
changes slow
crazy, isn't
enough
it?
that you don't notice. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's not many things in life, especially on the internet, that you can say kind of has that feel to it. Where yes, there's definitely been changes to it, but it happens at such a slow pace that you don't really feel it.
Yeah.
Like it feels like it's still the same place.
Yeah, and
But
I salute them for that. And like their ad model, it's annoying, but it does work. Like it works. It supports people doing things. It can get a little obnoxious at times. But the old dream of like making like, maybe half your rent or something with a modest YouTube channel is still alive and well. That's kind of amazing to me because these things kind of burn out a little bit, and it doesn't seem to have burnt out. Like I remember when RC Sparks was out. I don't know if you are into RC cars at all, but like RC Sparks was making like $1 zillion a year on YouTube ad revenue. And it was brought up as this case of how crazy that is. And this was probably like 2009, 2011, something like right, near the beginning. Um, and people were saying how crazy that was and how silly and how, unsustainable it was and all this kind of stuff. But now that model that RC Sparks did is like super common throughout YouTube. Not making $1 zillion, but like paying your rent with YouTube
yeah,
because people like you, or like people sailing around the world is another one that I follow.
yeah,
They
that
just
and
go
tiny
sailing.
houses.
Yeah, people watch them and watch ads so they can see them sail. And these are things worth supporting. Like these are people who aren't hurting anybody. Like we should support them.
Yeah, I went through a huge phase of people doing like van houses and tiny houses, and
Right. Yeah.
like just
Yeah.
watching the creative ways that people were able to do that sort of stuff, and you fall down the rabbit hole. That's one thing YouTube is good for, is finding a rabbit hole and then losing like 3 days of
Yeah.
your life as you've just binged through stuff.
Yeah.
But
And so many of the other platforms that you mentioned, you can't do that. It's all like bite-sized and kind of vapid and cheesy, and you actually feel kind of gross if you go too deep on it and look at it too much. But YouTube, you don't feel gross. You feel like you're like learning something. You're like, hell yeah, I just watched the entire catalog.
Yeah, there's a saying like that the most important, like it used to be when I was growing up, everybody was to say like the most important thing that you have is time, right? Like money is nowhere near as important as time. And I think the most important thing you actually got is your attention, because I've got more time than I do ability to provide attention to anything. And when we live in an age now, especially like even in role-playing games, even in this niche tiny market of the entire planet, there is so much stuff put out every day. How do you find getting, you've got an audience, but like when you're first building that up, or if you were to advise somebody else, how do they get attention to their stuff? How do they differentiate themselves from, especially in the OSR space? Here's 16 other basic clones.
Yeah. There are two metaphors that are useful to that person. And I know it's a good question you ask, because a lot of people are asking that question. How can I start and get, as you describe it, attention? And I think there's two metaphors which perfectly match at least how I would advise doing it. I know there's all kinds of methodology, right? Like thumbnails and hashtags and all that stuff's cool. If you're into it, rock on. But I would compare doing it to either, like, it's a lot like going to the gym or going to a bar. Now, let's just leave the bar out because it leaves everyone under 21 out. Okay, so let's just focus on the gym. The gym is terribly boring. No one stands out, and everyone is doing the same shit. So how are you supposed to be somebody different? And there's only one answer, and it's just to show the fuck up again and again and again and again. And pretty soon, the person at the front knows your name. And then they give you a different greeting than they give the other people, because it's you again, because you're a savage. You know what I mean? And then, like the custodian, like one day you help him move that weird buffing machine because he's kind of got it stuck in a corner, and then he knows your name. And it's not because you're like bigger, badder, faster than anybody else. It's just the consistency of it. And it's a really boring answer, but I think it's really is, especially the more that this proliferates, I think it's becoming like almost the only answer. It's like you've got a ton of talented people, and they're all pretty awesome. So just waving your arms isn't going to be like, oh, okay, yeah, you win, you're the coolest. I think it's more just show up, give a fuck about people, know their names, they know your name, and then you just show up the next day again. It's like the old saying, well, what is it? How can you call yourself a chef if you never cook, right? So you just cook, and then you cook again, and you cook again, the same shit, the same beef stroganoff every damn day. And you do it, and before you know it, like, people give a rip about you. And I really think that's a brutal but real answer.
No, and I think that's probably the best sort of advice you can give too, because everybody's looking for the fast answer. I don't want to put in that much time. How can I just get it now? The instant gratification. And I think people need to hear more often, well, that's just not going to work. Or if it does work, it'll probably be incredibly, short-sighted, and it'll work for 10 minutes and then you'll be forgotten again.
Right. And if you have both, you'll be a powerhouse. If you have the consistency and you do the bells and whistles stuff, then yeah, you'll slay it. Because really, I don't do the bells and whistles. I just do the kind of still here kind of vibe. Right. And I get surpassed by a lot of, creators who are, sort of younger than me in creation time, but much more thorough and produced and awesome than me in productivity, which is fine. I'm totally okay with that, because I've got all my own kind of other stuff going on. So when it comes to YouTube, I like to just interact with people directly. That's really how I see its main function. Not necessarily like cracking you up with like jump edits like I did in the very beginning. It's like a lot of comedy jump edits. Jump edits are infinitely funny. Everybody loves them. But it's just not necessarily where I want to put all my work time right now. I'm really having fun just making games and then running them. I'm very fortunate to have like a big player pool right now. So got 4 games going simultaneously, and 3 of them are in the same world. And like,
That's awesome.
just doing that is plenty, and then telling people about it. That's that's plenty of effort for me.
So it's funny you bring that up. I've been having this discussion with somebody else as well. How do you find having multiple games in the same world and handling like timelines and one party doing something that impacts another party? Has that been is that something you're just like, I don't care, we're always having fun in the world, or is that something you actually are tracking and trying to work out in any way?
A little bit of both. A little bit of both, but I'm also like I'm like the most transparent GM that there is. So I will just tell people. I'll just be like, okay, well, last week in our other thing, there was some crazy shit went down. Suffice it to say, you guys, there's like a volcano here now. You know, like we don't really make a fancy mythic. You know, it's like Kurt Vonnegut said. You know, that like surprise is what does he say? Surprise is the tool of the liar, right? It's like a good author doesn't try to surprise you. He just straight up tells you. Like,
right.
You know, like in a lot of his work, he's just like, yeah, actually, these characters are all dead. They're going to die. But, you know, they're going to go through this first. And here's how it began with this guy, Sam, or whatever. You know, that's kind of how he does it. And that's a lot how my tables are. We just openly talk in meta. And it's just kind of out there. We just sort of lay it out. So I think that relieves a lot of that pressure of like, I'm going to create, you know, 4 interlocking mystery novels, you know, just like, oh my God, my head is exploding. You know, it's more just like, wow, last week we kind of screwed up our session and we accidentally like unleashed this volcano. So that town you guys wanted to go to is now like covered in ash and stuff. Is that something everybody can groove on? Is that all right? And they're like, I thought you guys' like world was like 2 years before our world. I was like, yeah, we're feeling like it's kind of closer. I mean, It works, you know, and that's kind of how we get through it.
All right. I got a couple more questions. I know we're coming up close on the end of when I said we'd have us off, but so last question or second last question, 2-parter. If you had to distill all the knowledge that you've gotten from say ICRPG or the various YouTube streams, and you're going to give one single piece of advice to a DM and a player, because they're obviously different pieces of advice for both. What's the one piece of advice you got for either one?
The GM advice I would give is always only plan 1 session at a time. Do not try to plan beyond 1 session. It's not fair to players and it's not fair to you. As far as for a player, I guess my advice would be live in the now, not the past. The past of your character is interesting, but it's not what we're doing as a group.
I feel that so much
now.
Yeah, that's always been my kind of been my philosophy as well. But especially when people come to me asking about backstories, I've always been like, I don't care. We're not playing your backstory. We're playing what's going to happen to you in the future. Yeah. So,
well, I've kind of you want to hear them out because it's salient to what's going to occur. But I think it bears reminding almost constantly with a lot of players of like, live in the now, live in the now. You don't have to make everything a callback. You know, I know Easter eggs are like cute in TV shows nowadays, but your character is not just a collection of Easter eggs, you know, like live in the now, enjoy the moment, be heroic now.
All right. And then the last question I've got for you is one I end almost every interview with is, you've talked to a bunch of people on shows like this or just on your own stuff. What is something that you wish somebody has asked you that you haven't gotten a chance to answer? Or when I pinged you and I was like, hey, will you come on the show? Was there a question in your back of your head? You're like, oh, if he asks me this, I got the answer for it. What did I not ask that you wish somebody would ask you about?
I think maybe just because that's a tough one. I think just because I have so many different interests. I guess the one I would want to be asked is like, you know, what's the project that all your rapture and your involvement in what you're doing right now, what's the project that because of all that you're not doing?
Oh, that's a good one. Think so take that one away. That's perfect.
Yeah, and that would be like the joke that I made earlier, which is I would totally be like a beer journalist. I would be traveling the planet, drinking beer and writing about it in a erudite way.
You would be the person on that sailboat going to different places to write about beer that we could all watch on YouTube.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, yes, that is, I guess I like that as a question, because it's just outside of what maybe is somewhat constant from my point of view. From my point of view, this is just kind of my thing.
Right.
It's like every day there's RPG stuff going on. There's like this many miniatures to work on. There's like a lot of writing to do. There's huge maps that need to have all the little things shaded in. But in the other part of your brain, if all this just sort of was magically handled, what would you be doing? I'd be drinking beer and discussing if it was made with a centrifuge or with a horizontal tank settling method.
Very nice. All right. Hey, can you pitch all the things and all the places people can find you? I know there's a Kickstarter. I didn't even bring up the Kickstarter that you've got, where you're one of the stretch goals, I believe. But
yeah, I'm one of the stretch goals. I don't know if it'll make it or not. That system in that Kickstarter is based on Legend of the Five Rings, which I know a lot of people has a pretty good following. I just don't really know that world, so I don't really know if that's going to go places and get crazy or not. But yeah, working on that. You can catch up with my main stuff at runehammer.online. That's kind of my little hub zone. But thanks to my patrons and their like clarity, the three things that you can expect from me in the future, I'm doing a new sort of what we call a kitchen sink RPG. It's like a full-on RPG that's called Crown and Skull. We're working on that right now with 3 groups of players. And then we have probably the most requested thing ever. I'm finally working on it in earnest, which is called the Runehammer Handbook. And it's kind of like the book that you can't live without in your backpack, sort of, as a GM. And the third thing is like a more complete, is the word that's been thrown at me, adventure for ICRPG. So I write my adventures very loose, like a skeleton. And I've gotten a zillion requests to make one that's very fully realized, with like every map and all the NPCs and all the little dialogue blurbs and like everything all plotted out to really help like cement people new to the systems and stuff. That's called The Last Voyage of Finnegan's Pride. It's kind of a classic kind of spooky sort of derelict ship adventure. But those 3 things are like the 3 things to sort of look for me doing, look for me talking about. And like all the miniatures that go with the games that I'm running, I have an all-female group that's starting in December. I'm super excited about that. And none of them have ever played a single second of D&D.
Oh, that's the best.
Oh, I know. It's just going to, so I'm making sure that I am mega ready to blow them away. So it's like all the terrain needs to be ready, all billions of miniatures, and like ready to go multiple directions and take it wherever they want to go. And yeah, so those are kind of the big things on my plate right now. And it's just a matter of being patient, working on them in a patient way, which is like not my core strength.
That's awesome. Getting players who have no preconceived notions and no pre-bad habits is so nice, because they're
good
free.
Friends, they're really, they're already great friends. They already get along great. They always have fun together. So I know that they'll like bond and care about each other. It's going to be awesome. Can't wait to tell everybody about that once it gets going.
That's awesome. Yeah, and everybody should go in, and if they're able to become part of the Patreon, because you put up polls like these 3 things you were just talking about. I saw recently there was the poll up of like, hey, here's a list of a half a dozen things or more. What ones should I actually focus on? So you can
and sometimes the answers are like, oh no, but other times they're like really like align with what I want to do. And now is one of those times. So feeling very lucky going into the winter to work on all this stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show and speaking with me. It was a pleasure to talk to you and kind of get to know you a little bit. And I've loved your products, and I've watched your YouTube videos for years and years now. So it's great to get a chance to chat with you. And hopefully everybody got to to learn a little bit and see how much you cheated on your D&D character sheet here, because it's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, Kevin. I hope we can just have a beer sometime together in person.
Yes, once I get myself back down to the US, I will. If I'm in the Philly area, I'll drop you a note.
Awesome, man.
All right, guys, I'm going to toss this to future me that's doing all the editing and stuff, and I'll talk to you again in a second. Okay, folks, all the links are down in the show notes for all of Hank's amazing things. Check him out. It was so much fun talking with him. And this is going to wrap up October. This is the last episode of October, but it's not going to be the last interview. There are going to be more interviews. There's a couple booked already, and I'm going to be trying to book some more into November. I had a lot of fun doing them. I'm really glad that I kind of kicked this up here in October. The frequency, like I've said a few times, was a bit much, but I'm going to try to continue doing them because they were a lot of fun. And if you have suggestions on people you'd like to have me have a conversation with, or if you know somebody, send them my way or drop me an email. Again, on my website, you can find all the ways to contact me. So this is going to wrap up this episode of the Redcaps Podcast. I hope you enjoyed, you learned something, and that you're eager to come back for more. www.theredcaps.net has all the links to all the ways to contact me, and I'd love to hear from you. Thank you very so much for listening. And remember, never let your caps dry out. Stay safe. Have fun. We'll talk again soon. Take care.